All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for Sam's and Jay's presentation. Super interesting. It's also, always super interesting to see what other people are doing in the space and have this exchange. I hope everybody else enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you for the invitation to present here. And what I would like to do, obviously, I'm going to present things and share things with you, but I'm always very curious to, get into a conversation as much as possible with everybody taking the time to listen in. So let's take it away. We're going to be talking about the Scope City, which some of you might have seen. It's a procedural city manufacturing is what we call it, because what we're building essentially is a tool in Houdini that allows us to create, permutations of cities, different types of cities, and it's an ongoing and growing tool that, you know, simply said, allows us to create cities, mainly for automotive. This is where we're coming from as well. And the need for Scope City arose in our work. We do a lot of launch projects, like very similar to Jay's presentation, where we have very quick turnaround times. And having a location ready to shoot when you need it essentially is unavoidable these days, with all the deadlines getting shorter. So what I would like to do first is to show you what we're doing so that you get an idea about our output. And I'm going to run this, and I hope it transfers properly. This is our latest show reel. So as you can see, we're working for all kinds of car brands, from China to America to Italy. And what I would also like to do is one of our, what I feel is one of the latest and greatest projects that you might have seen as well, for a company called Automobili di Pininfarina, which had a very cool cooperation with a brand that you might recognize. So let's take that away and then go to So as you can see, it's Bruce Wayne's car that is being produced. They produce 5, and I talked to them recently, and they're all sold out. If anybody of you was thinking of getting one and had a 5 million or so to spare, sorry, too late. So I think what most of you are here for is to get a better insight into the technology, the process, how we develop Scope City, what we're doing in that department. So I'm going to run this clip. This is something you can also find on our website. When you go to Scope City on the website and scroll down, you'll see the same clip. Essentially, it's not a full breakdown and a tutorial how to do it, but it shows a little bit of the things that we developed over the last 5 years. What you see here is we're basing the city on OpenStreetMap data, which we feel is very, very cool to get a feeling of a city. We learned a lot about city design, city architectural rules that they have, and all these things. Very similar to Sam's research, actually. When you dive into it, you learn things that you were not aware of. So when you look at New York, there are certain, height regulations. The steppings of the buildings have reasons because they're selling air rights to neighbors, and there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there when you look at New York real estate, especially. When you take that to a LA situation, for example, you'll find that the lots are much larger because California has more space. They have different rules of building things, and all these things are important to get the feel of a city. And in the automotive sector, the interesting thing is people wanted to look real, they wanted to be authentic, but in the next step, they're like, well, we don't want to see anybody else's intellectual property. We don't want to have to pay building owners for, their rights. So it's a very interesting balance of making it look real without actually using real things to give them the legal room to breathe, let's say. Up to situations where we had made up names and the legal team said, well, we found a coffee shop that has the same name in, I don't know, Portugal or something like that. And they said, well, you cannot use it because we don't want to get sued. So we, just turned it into cafe in that specific project. And maybe I'll jump in here. So as you can see in these samples, the team has built a tool that reads and digests OpenStreetMap data, but in the next step, it gives us a lot of creative freedom to design buildings the way we need it. Because once you're in shot, as a creative, the chances that you want to change things are, let's be honest, it's 100%. If you can change it, you will go and change it. We have preset things where we say, okay, this is cool, let's start with that. And we, go into build locations and start scouting them. But once you put a camera on it, you might be in a situation where you say, well, the brickstone building is not what I'm looking for. It doesn't feel right. Can I have something modern here? So within our workflow, obviously we can do that. We can go back to Houdini and output something else to be more precise or to create something that answers the brief of the specific car a bit more precisely. So using the location, the city in this case, as a supporting actor. Because when you look at car films or the car films that we are doing, which do not have people lifestyle elements in them, you're in the situation that you have to create a film and create an emotional layer, which you can do with the cameras that you pick, the lensing, the depth of field, very similar to what Jay has described. So using the same cinematic tools. But then you have the next layer, which is the location, the city, that is giving you a certain vibe. It's giving you references that from all the films and visual assets that you have seen. So the audience can reference things back to known films and artwork. So this is what we're trying to do. This is what we build and create as a location so it can fulfill this task. On another technical level, this is a workflow that we've developed, which we call centerpiece. And as it says up there, we use this when we want to have very, very precise control over the art direction of the location. So the team has built a workflow where we can model very simple blocks. As you see, these are not very, you don't have the edges and all these things, but we can use them to create a location, do the steps and all these things, and then they run through a Houdini pipeline to get the detailing and are being decimated. I'm going to let this run as well. And it happens on several layers, right? The street layer, then the object layer, the things that are necessary to put together a location like this. But what is interesting is, so we have the street layer that gets a lot of love from us because it's, anything that is closer to the car is more important in our world, but also needs control. Like you can see here, we can put, manholes where we need them and do all these things depending on creative decisions. And then we can create fairly simplistic cubes as stand-in buildings, which we then also run through Houdini again. And Houdini takes the asset library base that it has, the Lego pieces that it has, and builds a building from a certain arch type of a building. So let me pause it here for a second. So these cubes can be output as different types of buildings. The colors that you see here indicate certain things, within our system, what type of building it's going to be. But we could use the same geometry and say, well, just give me a Soho type of building. Would look wrong in this context, but we could assign a different arch type of architecture to those cubes. So part of the heavy lifting, the time that goes into it is selecting building types, breaking them down into elements that our Houdini system can read, and model these elements that can be reconfigured based on a lot size, lot shape. As you can see here, it's not all square, we can have different indentations and all these things. So these are all things that the team has developed over the years. We started with cubes, and then they're like, well, we need corners. Now we need something what building can read if there is a neighboring building. So can there be a window? Can there be no window? So there is rules and workflows that are building on top of each other. And that is for me, fascinating thing with Houdini. And to be very honest, I cannot operate Houdini if my life depended on it. But what I know, what I understand is essentially that we're building a assembly line, a machine that outputs cities. And fantastic. So great Houdini thing is you solve the problem, you package it in one of these modules and say, well, we need a better corner tool. So then the team goes and just works on the corner stuff and substitutes that element. So it's not one-offs. It's not, we just do it for the project. It's the time and effort that goes into it has a long-term value. And it keeps getting better and better and better. And we're also using the base setup, for example, to create suburbs, because the logic of it is very similar. So, what did I do? Right, so and then we have this thing with photorealism. There's a certain obsession, and we like geometry, and that's why the interiors are, for example, built in geometry. There is geometry scattered within the buildings, so it's not just picture. The picture solution. I'm not sure what it's named, but because having that gives us deep trust on the location asset when we go into production. I don't have to worry about the asset. I don't have to shoot around things where I know, it's not going to live up to, me going close with the camera. So everything has the same, sizing, calibration. I know how close I can go with the camera. And if I need, I can go back and ask for a higher resolution asset, which we rarely do because the whole city is built on 6 pixels per centimeter. That is what it's calibrated for right now. Solves 99.9% of the challenges. Sometimes for stills, we might need to do something else, but stills, we started to go more towards set build solution for stills, because for stills, you need a bit more flexibility for lighting and all these things. And when it's just pieces that you can move around in a locked camera, that turned out to be more successful in live production. So here is something that is also pretty interesting, what the team has developed. So they model things very simplified, like you can see here, low poly modeling. Because we had the situation where we were using sourced asset, bought assets. And if you have a lot of different sources for the input that you bring into your scene, the city in our case, you carry a lot of debt, right? It's like, calibration is this and colors are off and the naming is this. So it costs you time for operating, it costs you time in rendering. And it's a quick fix always. It's like, just needed, why would I model a hydrant, right? Again, when you're in a situation where we say, we're building a city tool, we're going to be outputting cities for other people as well, which we're starting to do right now, so that other teams can work with it. We need to have a certain standard that is where we can do quality assurance, where we know if we send something off to another team, that we don't trouble them with messy stuff, right? Nobody wants that. You don't want to receive it. I don't want to send it out. So then it's worth investing the time, to solve that problem from the foundation. So this is what the team has done here. They build a workflow, we can model quickly, do all these edits. It's, this is almost real time, I think we're looking at right now. And then it's not visualized, but then they pipe it into a Houdini tool. And Houdini does the edges, decimation, turns it into interesting geometry, right? So this step, where, even in gray shade, you see it looks more realistic from the get-go. This asset then is sent to Substance Designer. And in Substance Designer, the team has developed a full, also procedural workflow, where we only need to, when we want to do changes, either change the input, get another output, but we don't do things in the middle. That is the theory, right? You don't patch it here, do it there. If you don't like it, you go back to 0, import geometry, create new materials, and output that. And that is automated. Again, it's quite a lot of work to do it, but you only need to do it once. And when you figured it out, then you can keep scaling these systems onto different assets. For example, the way we do hydrants, we also do elements for buildings, right? So the elements for buildings in the beginning just need to be cubes, but this is the output you get. It was a bit short. So essentially the same tooling gives us a architectural element with this amount of detail. Watertight geometry with UV mapping and all that stuff. And with additional potential to up-res it, to create higher resolution maps in the future, because obviously we know technology is advancing. So in 3 years, the machines that we're using today will be like, oh, it's old stuff, right? So you can have more geometry, you can have more texture, more, all these things. The system then can go in and say, oh, well, let's say we had a 1K texture. We're like, well, let's go 4K because the compute can handle it. So we can keep adding detail with the same build, right? So we just change the input settings in that case. So here I have a few clips of outputs and what they look like when we use them, see them. What's running right now is the Omniverse version, which I have to say, Omniverse pretty interesting for us. Render quality is great. USD as a base format is great for flexibility, right? Lighting and all these things work, but also you can touch geometry, you can move buildings around, you can change materials in shot while you're working on it. So I had pretty successful tests with that. Then if we take it to Vantage, which is the real-time solution that Chaos Group has published, which we are also, we're big fans of Chaos. We are V-Ray users, and we've been working with Chaos on the Vantage to Arena thing. Arena is the LED Studio software that they're publishing, alternatively to Unreal, if somebody is interested in that. So our assets work for LED screens if somebody's using Arena at this point. And again, this is, real time. We can scout it. We can do quite a lot of things in Vantage, and then always have the option to jump back to V-Ray to render final pixel. So this is our pipeline right now that we're using. And Omniverse is the first different output, let's say, that's outside the V-Ray ecosystem. Unreal is something that many people are asking for. We're looking into it, and I think I'm pretty sure the Unreal users here in the audience know, and also as Jay described, it's not plug and play, right? So we don't have Unreal experts in the team, so we're struggling with a few things. Well, let's say Unreal is struggling with a few things in the outputs that we're generating. We're working through that whenever we have time. So it's not the top priority in the team right now. Might change because we're not producing with Unreal. But we understand there is a lot of interest, and essentially, technically, it should look exactly like the clip that you're seeing. So Vantage and Unreal are not too distant. They're cousins, let's say. Because USD and PBR textures, materials, it's pretty close. And Material X, we feel, is going to be the solution for all, let's say, our pain, right? Open USD with Material X. The promise is it's going to open everywhere. It's going to work everywhere. So also that is in development whenever we have time to work on it. But so this is, the latest. This is the centerpiece that was, hand designed with the cubes that you see here. Some screen captures actually. So this is what it looks like in real time in Vantage without grading all that stuff. You have this amount of detail that you can access when you're in scene. So this is this. I think this is walking around in the city, just to get a feel. Yeah, and this is what we feel 6 pixels per centimeter, usually even in 4K, does a trick. Does a trick to be photorealistic. If you add color grading at the end, we feel comfortable with the quality that we can supply there. So what are we doing now? No. Everything moving. So as a general, how should I say, background on how we think, how we approach things, I put these together, called them the reasons why we think things work, the reasons why we, managed to get where we are today. We're not, still working on it, but how we could get there. Main thing that we do is we say technology follows creativity. So, meaning, what is it I want to achieve, and which technology can I push to the limit to get there? To do that, you need to explore technology very deeply. It's not, it cannot do it in a day or two. So you need to push, and squeeze and test and actually do a lot of stuff that maybe even the people that published the technology didn't push themselves. So it's like push it until it breaks and see how much we can get out of it. Only looking at it in a technological lab situation before we take it into set. So this is one of the workflows that we employ. If there's something new out there, we give the team time to really dive deep into it. And sometimes it's a dead end, honestly. And it's, those are expensive dead ends, but sometimes it's a dead end. You say after 4 weeks, like, no, that's not going to fly, right? Because it doesn't do this. I tried this, I tried that. So, in the realm of locations, cities, sets for CG, details. It's about details, and it is also saying here. It's like if it's in the shot, it's visible. It's not like no, nobody's going to see it. No, nobody's going to care about it. It's not true. Can't get away with things. If the camera can be pointed at it, it better be photoreal. Then you can trust it and focus on creativity. So that is another thought that I think is important, and it's easy to discard in stress. But if you look at things and say, well, will it hold up in 6 months when the deadline is 6 months ago and you worked on 5 other cars? Will you be comfortable looking at this asset? This is how we try to measure our work. That leads into shortcuts, lead to painful delays because they come back, they hurt you, right? And when you're building a machine that builds cities, like what we had a look at is, having the substance designer pipeline designed, stable, really tested, where you really know what's going to happen with the procedural materials that you're outputting, where you squeezed it, where you tested it, where you broke it. Then you can say, okay, we know what we're doing. I trust it, and this is the best that can happen today. Tomorrow might be different. Again, being able to focus on a project like Scope City for the long run, I think that is something that is fairly unusual, which I'm sure everybody working in CG land or any project-based environment, I don't know how you do the pitch and say, well, management, we need 12 months and we're not sure if it's going to work, right? But please give us money and time. It's a difficult pitch. And, we're lucky that I am probably ignorant enough on the business side of things that, well, this is what we need to do to get a good product. So this is where it all stems from. Next step is the moment you have it under control, automate as soon as you can, but not sooner. So it needs to work, needs to be broken, tested, all these things. At the moment when you're, well, this is fine, let's stick with this, then we move into automation to free up the time of smart humans, right? So when a machine can do it safely, repeatedly, then we do that. And also it reduces what we, hidden knowledge pockets. This is what we coined it. I don't know if it's a thing. So if you have one person that did all that stuff and that person's on vacation or sick on that day, and you're like, nobody knows how that works, that's very, very dangerous. So it should be then a button we can push and say, well, let the machine do that. The output is going to be fine because we know the inside of the machine is designed properly. The next thing is calibration of all inputs is paramount. So this is also something we learned during our journey. It goes back to shortcuts. That was not a shortcut that we took on purpose, but you design a texture like this, you do this, you use photograph textures, and then you use scan stuff, and all these things are adding up to complexity. Going back to the drawing board, we said we need procedural materials because we need to be able to manage them without certain know-how, but we need to know that we get the same quality when we change something. Very simple, right? If you say, oh, this is metal, now I want it more rusty. Sounds simple enough. How do you create the rust? How do you decide? Can you have very quick visual feedback when you do it? And then when you've done it, does it come into your pipeline in a very, very clean fashion? So that's why we, dove into Substance Designer and have that. And that's where all the textures and materials are 6 pixels per centimeter. Again, pays into the trust that you can have in the asset, so you don't have to worry about it. So the future. So interestingly, and I think there's a few people from different areas. What we are working on is we're working on creating an offering to other studios so that they can come and license Scope City versions, Scope Cities, or customized cities, which is already happening in certain areas. But we want to start offering cities, ready to use, right off the shelf. So virtual production, which is very Unreal heavy right now, is interesting with Arena. The Unreal version is going to be interesting for them as well, which we'll have sooner or later. But this is an area where the city can be very valuable to the customers because they can change things, right? They can move buildings around, do all that stuff, but I have a certain quality. So this is an area we see a lot of interest, and obviously CGI VFX studios. So what we're doing, what Sam and Jay are doing. Well, not Sam. Sam is later in the game studios. But let's say CGI VFX studios could be Jay saying, well, I need a location, have a new project, something like that. Very interesting area where we had odd touch points because we worked with NVIDIA on the Omniverse version is physical AI, synthetic data. So it turns out to train robots, some people are looking for environments where they can train robots. And for some machine learning tasks, it seems to be very important to have very high fidelity of the asset to get better models. So this is something that is fairly new to us. We're talking to people, super interesting. So we'll see how that goes. Game studios, obviously could have a few conversations there. Definitely can use a city. Matrix City demonstrated it. Has different challenges and tasks, but that's an area. And with the Chaos collaboration, there is, we had also very interesting conversations with Asheville Studios. So this is what we're thinking. Oh well, cool group of people, diverse, and we want to talk to those groups and see how they can utilize Scope City in their projects. So regarding that, going back to technology a little bit, so Maya V-Ray obviously is our pipeline. There are scenes available for testing, which you can download at the scopelocation.com. I need to put it somewhere. I'll share in the group. Same goes for Vantage Arena. So if you're in the LED space and are testing Arena, you can have that. We have an Omniverse version, which is for the robotics people at this point more. Unreal Engine, as I said, we're working on it. Should be, hopefully happens this year. But looking into the future, our hope is that OpenUSD Material X are going to be such a strong standard that we can focus on producing OpenUSD Material X scenes and everybody can use it as they please. And this is the presentation from my side, so I would be very happy to answer questions, talk.
All right, let me come alive here. Thank you so much. Very cool, very inspiring as always. Yeah, so let's do a couple of questions, but then maybe we can directly kind of continue or bring people into the whole panel discussion, because I think we're quite in a flow at the moment. So let's dive in. So Benjamin Rayner just wrote before, I feel Faruk's pain, and I believe we all do. We've all been there with all of the pain points which you mentioned, not only on the technology side, but also on the managerial side, on the trust side, with that a certain, let's say, investment is needed to be sustainable for the project or for the continuation into the future. So I think that's one of the aspects which I wanted to just touch on as a first point. And because usually projects are budgeted with a fixed sum, and because you don't know if it will continue into the future. But as you mentioned, building up certain systems just takes time, but then you might need to have multiple consecutive projects where you say, okay, we cannot do this at the moment, but we can budget it for the next project, and the third project is so. That's something that is really, let's say, difficult to do. And maybe you can give us a little bit of an insight, or how you were able to manage it to get into a functional and successful, let's say, system or method or business with the Scope City, to actually be able to convince people to trust you and trust the process.
Well, essentially what we have never, how should I say, we have never asked the client to finance Scope City builds. Mm-hmm. So we built them and said, look, we have a city, and it was just a corner, it was buildings first, and it was a corner. So, we could always offer a little bit more on the next project. But also, we've been very careful to not promise stuff we cannot do, and very diligently use the time between projects to work on Scope City, mm-hmm. Right? Again, it only works with a team that is really invested in it themselves, right? It doesn't work with, oh, you need to do that, where is the project, and did you build this? They need to have a motivation on their side to do it. And the deal essentially is that the company manages to give them time to work on it, to say, well, we're building this now, let's see if we can make money with it. Obviously, in our project, it helps us to secure jobs. And that's also why we kind of waited quite a long time before we said, well, we're going to go out and share this with the world. Because it felt like a secret sauce. We're like, oh, yeah, the city for us. Which, yeah, it is somewhat like that. But, we cannot do 5 jobs at a time. Just can't. And they never, they don't come in proper order, right? Either they come all at once, or nothing. So at one point we said, well, also based on the conversations we had with people that reacted to some LinkedIn post, we're like, well, you know, there's other great people, why don't we just share it? But the first build of Scope City was Maya V-Ray only. It was very rigid and was very heavy. It rendered slow, right? You know, we can take a lot of pain when it comes to rendering. Other people don't take that pain. And you're like, oh, 2 hours per frame on a thread but fantastic, right? Other people are like, are you crazy? You know, it's like
just 2 hours.
2 hours, right? Let's optimize for 2 hours. And because we're like, well, you know, it's photorealistic, this is what we promise our clients, but it was not a product that people were like, that's, you know, it's like, no, it's too slow, it's to this, it's to that. So the rebuild Scope City 2, we call it, you know, we have watertight geometry, you know, we change how we create material, we change how we get the assets. So that's also, you know, that kicked off these processes to do that. On top, obviously, you have intellectual property things, right? If we own everything, then we can obviously, you know, license it out without, you know, hurting anybody.
It's a huge factor. It's a huge factor.
Yeah. And this is something that comes on the table when it's real, it's a real job, right? Then legal or business affairs, whatever the name is, depending on the company, they show up and it's like, oh, right, and where does this come from, right? And so it's like something that is not very visible if you're not in a business, but it's a big factor for business. Mm-hmm. But did I answer your question? No, I started talking about other stuff again. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. I mean, we started with basically, but convincing people to continue investing, kind of based on the trust into future projects. I mean, this may be some, and I mean, you mentioned before you didn't kind of. This was never part of a deal to basically, let's say, build certain features. You just built the let's say, the platform behind the scenes, but this was never bound into a specific agreement. That's a very deliberate choice, right? So let's say in software engineering, other things are common where basically people say, we are going to build a specific feature, Material X being one of those examples where you say, okay, Material X as a team is not going to build it. It's going to be the companies that are part of the community that develops Material X they are going to develop the features because they need it internally. Right, and so there are many different, let's say, approaches to tackle that. But yeah, but maybe let's go a little bit to the creative side of how you got into, let's say, the modularity of the breakdown of the, let's say, storytelling, breaking it into the cubes and into the interchangeable interiors and so on. So maybe you can, especially for people that are not very familiar with the process for for the architecture needed specifically in the automotive sector. Maybe can you explain a little bit of the process? Why, let's say, for storytelling reasons, you would want to have, let's say, I don't know, certain buildings changed, certain interiors to be more illuminated, and why it's not just as easy as why don't you just switch to another street because there's also different buildings, right? And the car could also drive there. Maybe this could explain why you're even feeling the need to build such complex systems to address those wishes.
Well, That's the thing, right? It's like, this is what I was trying to say. When it's in the picture, it's in the picture, so it says something. And extremely simplified, if you put a car in front of a modern building, it says something else than when you put it in front of a brickstone building, right? You're positioning the car within a learned social environment. Mm-hmm. So you're saying this car is for Soho people or this car is for financial people, because you're not showing humans, right? It's like the location essentially tells you where this car belongs. And you need to show it in a way that is learned, but without full-on copying things. And the next challenge is, the more fantastical the architecture is, the more difficult it gets. We have this saying, location eats car. So only very, very, very few cars can handle standing in front of a Giri building or a Zaha Hadid building, although people keep doing that. But it is, the designs go into competition right away. Right, so who's the better designer, Zaha or the car designer? Right?
Yeah.
And the building starts to take away the glamour. So let's say you have a very simplistic, ugly, boring car, put it in front of the Giri house, you're like, okay, at least there's some design going on, right? But usually, if you put a Lotus in front of a Giri building, so what are you looking at? Right.
Yeah.
So the architecture needs to use the same brushes, maybe, let's say metal panels or a little curve, but not overpower the car. Very, very, challenging setup.
But see, that dynamic is so interesting. I imagine you've had some very interesting discussions with, let's say, certain car brands where they expect a certain architecture, and you would now then have to tell them, your cars don't deserve that type of architecture.
I'm not saying they don't deserve it. I'm asking them, do you want to go into this visual competition? Right? Do you want your car to compete with that architecture? Is that what you want to spend your advertising money on? Usually the answer is no.
That's a super interesting psychological dynamic. No, it's cool, right? But it's, again, for people that are not so strongly in that, or working in fields where you have, for example, a product like the car, and then you have these layered or these meta layers of communication that you have to consider. Let's say the type of architecture, even though it's not just a city, it's you're communicating on top of that multiple different layers, like certain indicators of which type of people you want to trigger a response from. I see myself being, I don't know, working in a bank. I see, where I work, it looks similar to that, so I can identify with that type of car brand. And yes, they drive around, right? So it's a multi-layered messaging, which is very, very deliberately crafted and engineered as part of the messaging and the storytelling. And because of that, it's in the subtleties, and because of that, you need to have the control in the builds, in the systems which you're building, right?
Exactly. I mean, if you look at, Volkswagen's too big, Mercedes, right? Luxury brand, all these things. Mm-hmm. When you look at the lineup they have, I don't know from the top of my head, but let's say they have 10 different car lines, but they're all Mercedes. Mm-hmm. And now, even within Mercedes, you need to differentiate the car lines. A CLA is a Mercedes, a Maybach is a Mercedes. You put them in front of the same house, same city? No. Right? And then And it's interesting. I picked up a magazine at the supermarket, the Auto Bild, which is, it's like a car magazine, and they have, and I hadn't seen that before, they have like a shopper's guide, right? So it's like a catalog of every car they're selling in Germany today that you can buy. Mm-hmm. 1,700 models without permutations. So it's not trim and colors. It's like 1,700 different cars. Yes, you have the Lamborghini, you have the Lotus, you have the Polo, whatever it's called right now. Mm-hmm. And when you look at that, so it's like, as a car buyer, you're like, okay, do I look for a big car, small? So you narrow it down, and obviously then the group you're moving around in becomes more focused. But for marketing executive, keeping Mercedes under the hood, in a brand space, you need control. You need a lot of control. So, and location is only one part of it. Next is light, the lensing, do you have trash on the street or you do not? How clean is your city? Do you see people in the city or is it empty? Is there other traffic? So these are all layers that, as an audience, you don't really think about it. But, we're trying to communicate to your learned systems. And your learned system is different than the one that somebody utilizes in America. What we find charming in America might be like, oh, so it's a rundown house. Right? Yeah. What we, feel it's pompous, they're like, oh, it's luxury. So you have the brand and you have the market, so it's and the things that you're cooking with is the car, the light, the location, the lensing, motion. Those are the 5 elements of a shot. DNA of a shot is hero, car, is light, location, camera, and motion for film or still, right? These 5 elements define a shot. If you even change one of it, everything else stays the same. It's a different shot. If you change 2, it's a totally different shot.
Yeah. Yeah, and because of that, because of all of these elements, it has to be engineered, right? And you need to. That's what I find so fascinating in why we have or the audience. You have people from different industries, but just discussing a shot for a car commercial, it's not so obvious that you might want to know a little bit something about the architecture because it's really important for this layered dialogue to have, right? And you might even be in a position where you're in a dialogue with a client that maybe is not yet aware of those dynamics, but you might be in a position where you can improve their vision even by making them aware of those dynamics and saying, hey, why don't you try this or this and that?
And it is, in our experience, or at least within, projects that we're doing, it's also similar to other things is like, when you can see it, you can judge it. If you need a high level of expertise on the other side to make a decision, nobody's going to tell you, I cannot decide it, I'm not educated in that field. And you're an architect, you must feel that more brutally, the moment everybody becomes an architect. They have an opinion. And if it's CG, they can start changing stuff. And then you start Frankensteining stuff. And people are like, oh, this doesn't look good. And it's like, well, because the door is 1.50 meters high. It's not for bigger people, right? But they made that. So it's a very long line of good decisions, calibration that you need to take to be able to trust the asset. That's why we say, okay, we have this, we output it, we don't even go into the conversation with the client. We're like, look, this is what it looks like. Do you like it? And they're like, no, I hate it. Too much brick. I'm like, okay, look at this, look at that. So we need to be able to have it ready. And I think other teams are in the same predicament. They have the same pain.
Oh,
that's what we said. Well, so obviously it's going to be business, but this is why we feel like, okay, sharing it is going to make somebody else live a little longer.
Nice.